Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Soul Land 2 based on novel. So let's start. Bei Bei glanced at Hui Yuhao. He was still quite hesitant, as their operation's chances of success would be greatly boosted if Hui Yuhao was present. However, Xian Ziwen had given so much blood and sweat for the Tang sect, and not even he could speak out against his wishes. Hui Yuhao suddenly said, "Teacher Xian, what do I have to do so that you'll let me go? Actually, I haven't been slacking in recent days." Xian Ziwen snickered and said, "You haven't been slacking. All right. It's simple to prove that you haven't been slacking. Soul engineers will use the Soul Engineers method. All you have to do is forge a Class 8 Soul tool for me and show that you can use it. Only then will you prove to me that you haven't been slacking. Furthermore, you have to be able to use it perfectly. Otherwise, you will stay inside the sect, and not even think about going anywhere. And you can't leave until you become a Soul Doluor, and until you can forge a Class 8 Soul tool. What do you think of my idea, sect leader?" Bei Bei glanced at Xian Ziwen, and then turned around to look at Hui Yuhao with a helpless look. Bei Bei would have clapped his hands in applause for what Xian Ziwen was doing if they weren't heading out to rescue Xiao Ya. However, this operation was extremely dangerous, and everyone would be able to predict their opponent's moves preemptively with Hui Yuhao around. But he couldn't contradict Xian Ziwen and cause him to lose face, so he could only nod as he said, "I agree." Bei Bei thought to himself, "Little junior brother, oh, little junior brother. Make your own luck. Whose fault is it that you've been spending so much time outside, to the point where not even teacher Xian can look on anymore? There's nothing I can do to help you." Hui Yuhao sighed and said, "Teacher Xian, that's too cruel. Can I forge a Class 7 Soul tool instead?" Xian Ziwen grunted coldly and said, "Don't think I'm unaware that you have long been a Class 7 Soul engineer. Even though there aren't many Class 7 Soul tools you know to forge, crafting one with your spiritual power is not a problem, not to mention wielding one. You are a soul sage, and using a Class 7 Soul tool is a piece of cake. There's no discussion. You have to forge a Class 8 Soul tool." Hui Yuhao forced a laugh and said, "But, Teacher Xian, I haven't even seen a Class 8 Soul tool's blueprint before. How can I do that?" Xian Ziwen snapped, "And you still have the cheek to tell me you haven't been slacking?" Hui Yuhao knew that he probably couldn't get out of this. Teacher Xian was extremely stubborn when he got serious, and nobody could say anything to change his mind. Hui Yuhao glanced at everyone else, and realized exasperatedly that most of his companions seemed to be rejoicing in his misfortune. Nan Qiuqiu's schadenfreude was most evident. "Why isn't anyone helping me?" Hui Yuhao was very aggrieved. "All right, Teacher Xian, I'll try. Can you give me blueprints for a Class 8 Soul tool? If I can craft one and use it, you have to let me participate in this expedition. Can you give me a few days, eldest senior brother?" Bei Bei stared at him in surprise. "You're really going to try, little junior brother? A Class 8 Soul tool? Was that a joke?" Before Xian Ziwen had arrived in Shrek City, there were only several Soul engineers within Shrek Academy who could forge Class 8 Soul tools. Among them were Hui Yuhao and Hikaitu's teacher, Fan Yu, along with Qian Duo, their vice dean. Not even the Valkyrie Doluor, Xian Lina, was that confident in accomplishing that task. In the end, Xian Lina's main focus was as a Soul Master. She was the Soul Tool Department's dean back then more so, because she wanted to gain some dignity back from Yang Xiaozhe. Hui Yuhao was still so young. He was already struggling to craft a Class 7 Soul tool back then, and it would be truly unbelievable if he could craft a Class 8 Soul tool just like that. Bei Bei tilted his head and said, "You are very stubbornly determined. If you want to try, then go for it. However, we will only wait 3 days for you, and then everyone will set off. I'll arrange some of the sect's various affairs within these 3 days, and you should make use of your time." Since Bei Bei had approved Xian Ziwen's request, he had to consider how to lead his companions to rescue Tang Ya if Hui Yuhao wasn't around. This was a serious matter, as they weren't that clear about the situation at the front lines. He had to use these few days to gather some intelligence from the front lines so that he could study it. Hui Yuhao was probably most adept at war and battle within the entire Tang sect. No one else there had really participated in the war before, and even when they did, Hui Yuhao was the one commanding them. He Kaitu and Hui Yuhao had participated in the Ultimate Soldier plan before, but He Kaitu was focused more on learning about support, mainly so that he could provide support for Hui Yuhao. Furthermore, He Kaitu wasn't going this time either. Hui Yuhao had a look of exasperation as he said, "All right, 3 days, then. Teacher Xian, please hurry and provide me with those blueprints. I will make that attempt now." Xian Zuan laughed. "You little rascal, now you know polish your spear before battle. You have been wilding so much outside, now it's time to sit down and focus. Go, let me see how you are going to craft a Class 8 soul tool. Oh, right, call me when you're about to start crafting it. Don't think you can smoke through this. Nobody can help you this time. Do I look like someone who smokes through things?" Hui Yuhao retorted indignantly. However, his heart was pounding in his chest. The truth was that he had wanted to look for Teacher Fan Yu so that he could ask for his help. Hui Yuhao was confident that he would have no problem using a Class 8 soul tool. Xian Zuan's idea of using a Class 8 soul tool perfectly meant that he wanted Hui Yuhao to unleash the soul tool's full potential and strength. Hui Yuhao wouldn't be so confident back then, but everything was different now, because he actually had a cultivation rank that was worth 8 soul rings. Even though he hadn't obtained his 8th soul ring, using a Class 8 soul tool wouldn't be a problem. Seems like I can't take any shortcuts anymore, Hui Yuhao heaved a sigh inside. Since that's the case, then I'll just work hard at giving it a try. Teacher Xian still doesn't know that I have a spiritual soul core, and I have improved a lot at controlling the more delicate and fine aspects of forging a soul tool. I might actually have a chance. Xian Zuan had already handed over a stack of blueprints. A high-level soul tool couldn't be detailed clearly with just one blueprint. The soul tool had to be split into its shell, formation arrays, how it was assembled, how it was activated, and other crucial components. Every blueprint detailed a component, and the soul engineer still had to assemble everything after forging those components and experiment with it to ensure that the soul tool would be perfect. Hui Yuhao's face turned grey when he saw those blueprints. Xian Zuan was undoubtedly deliberately trying to make things difficult for him. There were more than 30 blueprints in this stack. Not even a Class 8 soul tool should be so complicated. Teacher Xian is clearly certain and correct that I don't have a Class 8 soul tool of my own, so he deliberately found one that is hard to forge and extremely complicated even amongst Class 8 soul tools for me. You're so mean, Teacher Xian. Those were Hui Yuhao's thoughts, but he wasn't angry at all. Xian Zuan was doing this for his own good, and Hui Yuhao was very clear about that. He knew that it was about time for him to settle down and focus on studying and cultivation. However, they were going to rescue Tang Ya this time. How could he not participate? No matter, I'm going to give everything in this attempt. It'll be my fault if I really can't complete this task. Hui Yuhao took the blueprints and immediately turned to leave. Hey, Yuhao, what about me? The Ice Bear King, Little Bai pointed at his own nose and asked. Everyone had already noticed this fatso, but there was definitely no problem with him since Hui Yuhao was the one who had brought him back, so nobody asked any questions. Hui Yuhao thought about it and said, "This is my friend, eldest senior brother. He will come with us to rescue teacher Xiao Ya. Can you arrange somewhere for him to stay? I will provide his food. I'm going to take my leave. Second senior brother, can you accompany me and help me prepare some materials?" Hui Yuhao was part of the Tang sect's core, but he wasn't very familiar with the Tang sect's Soul Tool Hall. This was especially so, because the Soul Tool Hall had been continuously refurbished and renovated in recent months and years, and Hui Yuhao really didn't know where to find the rare metals that he would need. In order to prevent teacher Xian from trapping him even more, Hui Yuhao decided to ask He Kaitu for help. He Kaitu chortled as he stood up and accompanied Hui Yuhao out. The truth was that he really wanted to see how Hu Yuhao could forge a Class 8 soul tool. Hikaitu had been working very hard over the past year, and could even provide some help when Xian Ziwen was crafting Class 8 soul tools. However, Hikaitu wasn't confident at all in forging a Class 8 soul tool all by himself. After all, crafting a Class 8 soul tool was too delicate, and one needed formidable spiritual power and soul power for support. Furthermore, the materials needed for a Class 8 soul tool were very rare and precious. The more high-class and rare a material was, the more soul power expended in forging a soul tool. Many techniques in crafting Class 8 soul tools had to be completed in one go, and such a feat couldn't possibly be done without sufficiently powerful soul power. Hu Yuhao left with Hikaitu, while Bei Bei and the others continued to discuss who would remain. Hikaitu was definitely staying behind, while Nana accepted Bei Bei's order with a bitter look on her face. If Bei Bei wasn't there, the Tang sect would descend into chaos if their great butler wasn't around. Bei Bei felt that the Tang sect needed someone to hold down the fort. Jing Ziyan decided to stay behind after their final discussions. As everyone's strength increased, Jing Ziyan knew that her abilities were already lagging behind the Tang sect's prodigies, and she couldn't do much to help even if she participated. She had become a Soul Emperor far earlier than many of the Tang sect's individuals, but amongst the Tang sect's Shrek's 7 monsters, almost everyone now either had 7 soul rings, or were almost there, besides Wang Donga, who had gone missing while her soul power was only at rank 67. Furthermore, her martial soul didn't have any advantages, and thus she decided to stay behind so that she could actually contribute to the Tang sect. She was one with her husband anyway, and even if she didn't go, Ji Juechen would still definitely participate. The sword fanatic's thirst for battle was far too strong. Besides Jing Ziyan, Bei Bei decided after thorough consideration that he would bring along the rest of the Tang sect's core individuals. This operation was very important, and Hu Yuhao might not be able to participate. It was evident that their operation would fail if they didn't have sufficient strength. The final decision was for Bei Bei to take the leading role, while Xu Sansha, Jiang Nan Nan, Xiao Xiao, Ji Juechen, Yi Gai, and Nan Qiuqiu would all participate. Of course, Hu Yuhao would have a spot on the team if he could pass his test. However, nobody believed that he could actually do it. Bei Bei and 4 others from Shrek's 7 monsters were part of this operation, excluding Hu Yuhao and Hikaitu. In addition to the sword fanatic, who was also a Su sage, along with Yi Gai and Nan Qiuqiu, who were 2 soul emperors with special martial souls, their overall strength was unprecedentedly powerful. Of course, Bei Bei was very clear on the difference between having Hu Yuhao around and going on without him. Simply put, even if they encountered a titled Doluor, Hu Yuhao would give them a chance to kill their opponent with these prodigies' prowess. Without Hu Yuhao, the best they could do was protect themselves. But Din Yang and Elder Song, who were 2 transcendent Doluor, would also participate in this expedition. Their chances were probably quite good. Bei Bei began to prepare intricately after he decided who was to participate in this expedition. He had to make sure that the Tang sect's affairs were properly settled and arranged within the shortest possible time. At the same time, he had to make a trip to Shrek Academy's Soul Tool department so that he could request Xian Lina and Chen Duodwa's support, and so that these 2 deans could help him temporarily look after the Tang sect. To that end, the Tang sect wouldn't run into any problems. Hu Yuhao didn't have any energy to see how his eldest senior brother was arranging things. His thoughts were entirely occupied by how to forge a Class 8 soul tool. There was only one set of blueprints, and he didn't get to choose. Since he didn't get to choose, then he had to rely on his own effort. Fortunately, he had Hikaitu to help him. Even though he and Hikaitu had conflicted with each other for a chance to participate in this expedition, they were brothers after all, and how could Hikaitu sit by and watch when his brother was in trouble? The brothers entered one of the well-equipped silent rooms within the Soul Tool Hall. Hu Yuhao realized to his surprise that the silent room's layout was very particular and exquisite. There was an extremely large platform for crafting soul tools in the middle, and this platform's surface was silver-white, while there were all sorts of equipment and configurations around it. This seemed very similar from the one that he had used back in the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy, though this one was probably better. The reason was because there was some equipment and configurations that even he didn't know about. There were many metal racks and frames around the silent room. These racks weren't considered pleasing to the eye, but they were very practical, and that was because all sorts of rare metals were placed on these metal racks in all shapes and sizes. Typically, the more precious a rare metal was, the smaller the pieces on the racks would be. Forging soul tools would naturally become a lot more effective with a silent room such as this one. Hui Yuhao couldn't be bothered with admiring the soul tool hall's current development, as he walked briskly before the table and laid out the blueprints that Xian Ziwen had given him. Then, he started to study them closely. This was the first time that he had seen such detailed and comprehensive blueprints of a Class 8 soul tool, but this wasn't the first time that He Kai-tu had seen such blueprints. He Kai-tu's expression changed a little as he saw them. He couldn't help but utter, "Teacher Xian is cruel enough. Little junior brother, do you know what these blueprints are for?" Hui Yuhao was still looking at the rare metals that this soul tool required, but he hurriedly turned his attention towards the name on the blueprint's first page, when he heard He Kai-tu's words. Hui Yuhao's expression also became extremely spectacular when he saw the name. Decomposition Cannon. The soul tool's name was just two simple words, but Hui Yuhao drew a cold breath. Of course he knew about decomposition cannons, and such soul tools appeared in various classes. However, decomposition cannons of the lowest class occurred as Class 6 soul tools. A decomposition cannon was a single-target offensive soul tool, and its core principles included the element of space, and making use of space's pyrolytic properties to create formidable destructive power. Decomposition cannons were one of the hardest types of soul tools to forge no matter which class they were in, while they were also considered one of the strongest single-target offensive soul tools within their respective classes. That was the reason why He Kai-tu remarked that Teacher Xian was cruel. He was, indeed. Even Xian Ziwen himself would have to put in some effort if he were to forge a Class 8 decomposition cannon himself. Furthermore, Hui Yuhao could vaguely remember that Xian Ziwen had mentioned that Class 8 decomposition cannons were impractical and a waste of time. It had formidable attacking power, but forging it required too much effort, while the time and effort needed to forge such a cannon was enough to forge 3 other Class 8 soul tools. Even though these individual soul tools would have weaker attacking strengths, the 3 of them added together would still be stronger overall than a single decomposition cannon. Yet, Teacher Xian has chosen to use this decomposition cannon to stump me. Teacher Xian, oh, Teacher Xian. You are too cruel. Hui Yuhao wanted to cry, but no tears would come. But what else could he do? There was nothing he could do against Teacher Xian's authority. Hui Yuhao heaved a long sigh as he concentrated on studying those blueprints. Hui Yuhao had to make sure he knew what rare metals these blueprints required before he could gather those resources. He couldn't do anything more without sufficient materials, or everything else wouldn't matter, and he wouldn't even a chance to attempt this feat. What else was there to talk about? Fortunately, Xian Ziwen just wanted to see what Hui Yuhao could do after slacking for so long. Therefore, there were no problems with resources even though he deliberately chose a difficult Class 8 soul tool to pin him down. Shrek Academy had been receiving support from the Doluo continent's 3 native empires in secret. They didn't have that many rare metals, but they could be considered well equipped. Even though their haul couldn't compare to the Sun Moon Empire's scale, the 3 empires' combined national strengths was sufficient to support all kinds of research and soul tool production. Hui Yuhao used 1 hour to gather all the materials that he required with He Kai-tu's help, and only then did he begin perusing the blueprints for forging this soul tool. His expression quickly changed after just 1 look. So complicated, this is just too complicated. Teacher Xian, you're asking for my life. Hui Yuhao felt like he couldn't take it anymore after going through the blueprints for a little while. 24 pieces out of 30 were for designing formation arrays. Hui Yuhao wouldn't complain if 24 formation arrays were needed, because that was just a quantitative problem. He wouldn't have any trouble with that with his speed at crafting soul tools. The problem was that these 24 pieces actually depicted just 3 formation arrays, which meant that every formation array had 8 pieces on average, and what did that mean? That meant every formation array was as complicated as one could get. Those weren't simple two-dimensional pictures. They were all three-dimensional. They even breached topics of four-dimensional spatial features. For instance, the most important formation array hovered within the Soul tool. This was the first time that Hu Yuhao had even heard of a formation array being used this way, not to mention ever having seen one. Hu Yuhao felt like he didn't know where to start. A Class 8 Soul tool. It really is a Class 8 Soul tool after all. Hu Yuhao heaved a long sigh. Does heaven want to punish me? Hu Yuhao began to scrutinize those blueprints after momentary sighs and laments. He was never one to admit defeat just like that, and he had a defiant personality that made him stronger the more suffering he took. Hu Yuhao quickly immersed himself in his studies. He wasn't hasty to attempt to forge the Soul tool, but he just studied and interpreted the blueprints intently. From Hu Yuhao's perspective, forging wasn't too difficult. Forging a Class 8 Soul tool shouldn't be too difficult with his current soul power. That was especially so because he had support from his formidable spiritual power. With his spiritual soul core, Hu Yuhao was confident that his spiritual power wasn't inferior even compared to a Class 9 Soul engineer. The crucial problem lay in understanding this Soul tool's principles and its forging method before he could get any work started. Hikaitu was still watching from one side in the beginning, but he quickly realized that Hu Yuhao had been completely absorbed into the blueprints. Hikaitu was also staring at these blueprints seriously from the side, and even though these blueprints were so complicated that he wanted to vomit blood, they were still invaluable treasures for soul engineers like them. Not every soul engineer could obtain blueprints of such top-tier soul tools, and that was especially so for the Doluo continent's 3 original empires. Top-tier soul tool blueprints were considered extremely rare. However, Hikaitu felt like he couldn't keep going anymore after observing for a short while. The Class 8 decomposition cannon's blueprints were absolutely the most complicated ones amongst the various blueprints of Class 8 Soul tools that he had seen. Furthermore, they weren't just complicated. Hikaitu felt like his head was spinning after just looking at those three-dimensional blueprints for a short while. Hikaitu knew that he was lacking in spiritual power. Even though he was already working very hard, he knew that his spiritual power could only catch up after his soul power passed rank 85 for him to consider these blueprints. He stole a glance at Hu Yuhao, and discovered that Hu Yuhao was very seriously studying them, but he didn't seem like he was completely lost. Hikaitu couldn't help but feel a tinge of admiration and envy. Little junior brother's spiritual power is truly admirable. Soul engineers were more reliant on spiritual power in some sense compared to soul masters, and that was more the case as soul engineers became stronger. Time continued to pass. Hikaitu accompanied Hu Yuhao for another 2 hours inside the silent room, before he left quietly, as he knew that he could no longer help him in here. He didn't know how much time would pass before Hu Yuhao would awaken from his contemplation. Hikaitu left quietly, and informed the Tang sect's other members that nobody was to disturb Hu Yuhao. 1 day passed in the blink of an eye, and Hu Yuhao had been inside the silent room from the beginning to the end. Hikaitu came to visit him twice discreetly, and Xian Zuan even came to see Hu Yuhao once. However, Hu Yuhao didn't speak, and neither did he move as he stared at those blueprints, like his entire being was completely immersed within them. Hikaitu sighed exasperatedly, while Xian Zuan was feeling happy inside. Of course, he knew how difficult it was to forge a Class 8 decomposition cannon. This was meant to deliberately stump Hu Yuhao, after all. Xian Zuan was clear that becoming a Class 9 soul engineer was his limit with his talents. That wasn't because his abilities at research weren't enough, but because he didn't have enough soul power. He couldn't possibly become a transcendent Doluo in the future, and if he couldn't become a transcendent Doluo, then he wouldn't have a chance to try to become a Class 10 soul engineer in the future. Therefore, even though he had become a Class 9 soul engineer, his understanding about all that was far deeper than before. That was the reason why he came to realize how important Hu Yuhao was as a prodigy, and that only Hu Yuhao could carry on his legacy and work towards breaking through and becoming a Class 10 soul engineer. Therefore, Xian Zuan gave some deep thought about this, and decided that he had to find some way to convince Hu Yuhao no matter what, so that he would properly learn about forging soul tools from him. Under such circumstances, he needed Hu Yuhao to remain. Otherwise, wouldn't his intentions just be empty thoughts? Xian Zuan wouldn't be surprised if Hu Yuhao couldn't complete the decomposition cannon, but he didn't wish to see Hu Yuhao not have any solutions at all. From what he could see, if Hu Yuhao could at least immerse himself within those blueprints, then he definitely would gain some understanding of them. That was enough for him. Hu Yuhao was a youngster who had just become a Class 7 soul engineer. What else could Xian Zuan expect from him, if Hu Yuhao could understand a Class 8 decomposition cannon, which had a complexity that came close to a Class 9 soul tool? As long as Xian Zuan could guide him, and in addition to his continuously improving cultivation, Hu Yuhao wouldn't need more than 1 or 2 years before he could become a Class 8 soul engineer. Xian Zuan was very clear about Hu Yuhao's talents. That fellow was just too talented. Not only was he intelligent, but he also had formidable spiritual power supporting him, so he had a much easier time forging soul tools than other soul engineers. On the second day, Hu Yuhao still hadn't moved or spoken, neither had he eaten, or had anything to drink. He Kai-tu was starting to get worried, and he conveyed what he saw to Bei Bei. Bei Bei personally spoke with Xian Zuan, and he wanted to interrupt Hu Yuhao so that he could stop, but Xian Zuan stopped him. What? Stop. What kind of joke is this? Do you know how difficult it is for a soul engineer to be so immersed in his own studies? He can only truly experience the beauty of soul tools if he is frequently immersed in them and experiencing revelations from them. Only then can he improve quickly. Not to mention 2 days, he can spend half a month not eating or drinking with that body of his without a problem. The deal has been struck anyway, you guys will wait 3 days for him. If he doesn't come to after 3 days, you guys can just leave without him. Xian Zuan stopped Bei Bei irritably. From his perspective, Hu Yuhao was like a qualified soul engineer in his current state. He was more than eager for Hu Yuhao to continue being in such a state. Bei Bei couldn't convince Xian Zuan, so he had no choice but to allow He Kai-tu to continue sending food and water to Hu Yuhao. But Hu Yuhao paid no attention to all that. His eyes didn't shift away from those blueprints. He Kai-tu once observed Hu Yuhao closely for a little while, as he was afraid that Hu Yuhao was in a daze from scrutinizing those blueprints, but he quickly realized that Hu Yuhao was completely fine. The reason was because Hu Yuhao's expression was changing throughout the process. Sometimes he would frown, and sometimes he would express pleasant joy. There was a time when Hu Yuhao even slammed the table with his hand, which startled He Kai-tu. It was evident that Hu Yuhao was just immersed in his own research, and there was nothing wrong with him. 2 days had gone by while Hu Yuhao was still like that. The third day quickly arrived. Bei Bei had already made all the necessary arrangements for the Tang sect. Xian Lina and Qian Duoduo, their 2 deans, had agreed to his request to take care of the Tang sect, and they told Bei Bei to complete his task assuredly. However, Elder Xian had also given them a time limit. Everyone had to come back within 1 month, whether or not they could rescue Tang Ya. The Tang sect needed them after all, and the Tang sect's development was related to their resistance against the Sun Moon Empire in the future. The 3rd day is coming, and little junior brother seems like he won't be coming with us. Bei Bei said helplessly to Shu Sanxia. They were about to depart the next day, so they made some final preparations. Shu Sanxia pulled a long face and replied, I wonder why Teacher Xian is so determined this time. I'm honestly not confident at all without little junior brother around. I didn't feel that way last time, and he has always been the one planning strategies and whatnot. We're about to go onto the battlefield by ourselves this time, and I am a little lost about where to start. Bei Bei couldn't help but laugh. Seems like we have to train a little. Otherwise, won't we become laughingstocks? Shu Sanxia snapped, don't bite off more than you can chew. Who will be the main control type soul master without you? How? You, or me? Or who else? Not even Sister Xian is going, and Xian can still be considered a half control type soul master. Seems like Xiao Xiao has to take this role, but her control only works within a small area of effect, and when the battle is spread out over a larger area, she probably can't keep everything under control. Bei, why don't we look for Teacher Xian to convince him to let Yu Hao go this time? He'll learn properly when he gets back. Bei sighed and said, I know how important little junior brother is. However, Teacher Xian's attitude is very resolute. You know that the Tang sect couldn't have developed so quickly in recent months and years without him, and we couldn't have had so much support from the academy. Teacher Xian doesn't typically ask anything of us, so I can't reject his request this time, when he is so determined. Furthermore, he usually has a casual personality, but is very stubborn when he's decided on something. I'll only infuriate him if I look for him again. Forget it, let's just work hard by ourselves. I don't think we'll have too much trouble rescuing Xiao Ye with Elder Song and Dean Yang around. I guess that's all we can do, Shusansha replied exasperatedly. All right, I'm going back. Shusansha stood up as he spoke, when a voice suddenly came from outside. Done, he's done. Both Shusansha and Bei were momentarily stunned, as Hikaitu charged in from outside with an excited look on his face. What's done? Shusansha asked confusedly. Hikaitu said excitedly, little junior brother is done going through the blueprints, and he's starting to forge the soul tool. He's asked me to look for Teacher Xian. I'm here to relay this good news before calling him. Shusansha shook his head helplessly and said, Are you all right, second senior brother? Are you saying that he will succeed after he's done going through the blueprints? Won't that make becoming a Class 8 Soul Engineer too easy? You can go look for Teacher Xian. Yes. He might not succeed at forging the soul tool even though he's done with the blueprints. Hikaitu forced a laugh as he slapped his forehead. I just watched little junior brother stare at blueprints for 3 days, and my thoughts went sideways that he would definitely succeed when I saw that he was finally getting down to crafting it. Bei smiled and said, There's nothing sideways about that. Little junior brother might actually succeed. Isn't he very adept at creating miracles? Hikaitu nodded and said, I also think there's hope. That's because soul engineers have to understand a soul tool's principles before forging it, and they have to figure out a soul tool's blueprints, such as this one that they've never seen before. Little junior brother has been going through them for almost 3 days, and he's finally getting to work. Perhaps he's doing that because he's out of time, or perhaps he has really understood them. I'm leaning towards the latter, as little junior brother never does things without thinking. Therefore, he will only have a chance at forging the soul tool if he can understand those blueprints. Even if he isn't yet a soul doluor, he has twin martial souls, so his soul power is stronger than most other soul masters at the same rank. Maybe he can really do it, and his spiritual power is just so formidable. Alright, I'm going to look for Teacher Xian, and you guys can go take a look if you're interested. Let's cheer little junior brother on together, and hope that he'll succeed. Hikaitu ran out excitedly after his speech to notify Xian Zuan. Bei and Shusansha exchanged a look, and they almost uttered at the same time, let's go. Yu Hao was done with the blueprints, but he didn't start forging immediately. Instead, he drank some water, but didn't eat anything as he sat down with his legs crossed while he began to meditate. Yu Hao had spent almost 3 days on these blueprints, and he had consumed a lot of energy doing that. How could he craft a Class 8 soul tool without his energy in perfect condition? This was his first attempt. Yu Hao was still meditating when Xian Zuan, Bei, Shusansha, and Hikaitu slunk into the silent room, and he seemed to be deep in meditation. Everyone besides Xian Zuan was a little stunned when they what he was like. Xian Zuan nodded instead and said, That's good, he still knows that he should regain his energy before making this attempt. Seems like he's very confident. Let's wait and see. Waiting around was typically very torturous. At least, that was the case for most people, but Yu Hao quickly gave them a reason to remove that torturous feeling, because something was happening to his body. Yu Hao only had faint soul power undulations before, but as time continued to pass, those undulations started to change. Furthermore, those changes were extremely weird. Faint gold colors began to emanate from inside his body. That was very normal for most people, as they would think that it was just his soul power presented externally. Most people could reach this state when they were unbridled and they didn't need anyone to protect them. However, Hui Yuhao's aura was just so dominant. A terrifying aura that resembled that of an ancient awakening beast rippled from his body as the faint golden light continued to flow out in waves. Everyone inside the silent room, including Zuagen Zuan, began to felt a little stifled and found it difficult to breathe. Is he using imitation when he's meditating? Xian Zuan asked snappily. I don't think so. Bei Bei's expression became solemn. He was well aware of Hui Yuhao's abilities, and they were inside the Tang sect. How could he be using soul skills when he was meditating? But what was going on with that golden light that was emanating from his body? Hui Yuhao quickly gave his answer as fine. Compact scales began to appear on his skin. These scales were diamond-shaped, and even appeared three-dimensional, as the center of every scale protruded upwards. Under such circumstances, there were many reflections off the surface of these scales, and that made the faint golden light radiating from his body even more brilliant and eye-catching. Hui Yuhao's formidable aura continued to rise, and every instance gave everyone a kind of frightening pressure. If we hadn't been so used to spending so much time with this fellow, we'd probably think he's a savage beast in human form. Shu Sanxia said admiringly. It didn't take long before Hui Yuhao's aura that resembled a savage beast finally stabilized. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. At least they didn't have to channel soul power to resist that tremendous pressure. But their eyes quickly widened, because a strange black whirlpool gradually appeared in the middle of Hui Yuhao's eyebrows. Everyone felt their spiritual seas quiver vigorously when that whirlpool appeared, and formidable spiritual power was immediately unleashed from within it like a hurricane. Hui Yuhao's spiritual power was released for just an instant, but that instant sent everyone stumbling backwards uncontrollably. His spiritual power was released and withdrawn in a single instant, but it was released again in the next moment. I can't handle it anymore. I'll step out for a little while. Shu Sanxia turned and left the silent room, with a stifled look on his face. Bei Bei and the others also walked out with strange expressions on their faces. Hui Yuhao's spiritual power was too strange, and under such circumstances, they were continuously sustaining spiritual shocks. That was more painful than being in a fight, because they couldn't fight against it either, as resisting would likely create shocks to Hui Yuhao. The only person who didn't leave was Teacher Xian, who was already a Class 9 soul engineer. Xian Zuan stared at Hui Yuhao with widened eyes, and his mouth hung slightly agape as a look of disbelief filled his eyes. What is that whirlpool? The others in the Tang sect didn't know, and that was because they weren't at that level yet, but Xian Zuan was. Shrek Academy had wanted to express their gratitude for his contributions to the Soul Tool department, and several transcendent Doluor had personally helped him from his soul core. Even though his foundations weren't very secure, as he barely became a titled Doluor, and he could be stuck at rank 91 for his entire life, Xian Zuan could probably spend his entire lifetime without becoming a titled Doluor otherwise with his foundations. If he couldn't do that, he couldn't become a Class 9 soul engineer. He knew how difficult it was to form a soul core, because he had done it himself. Back then, he felt as if he had died, and he felt very deeply about how powerful and frightening a soul core was. But what was he looking at now? The center of Hui Yuhao's eyebrows was filled with formidable spiritual power undulations, and it seemed to release and withdraw spiritual power along with his breathing. It seemed like a soul core. But how's that possible? He's just a soul sage, so how can he have a soul core? It was very difficult for me to form my own soul core when I was breaking through to become a titled Doluor. Wouldn't he have a much harder time forming a soul core as a soul sage? But judging from the spiritual undulations that are coming from the center of his eyebrows, that is a soul core. God! Will this fellow give me a very pleasant surprise? No, that's not possible. Even if his spiritual power is strong enough, he can't possibly finish forging a Class 8 soul tool like this one. Forging soul tools requires more than just powerful soul power. A soul engineer also needs powerful soul power to support him. Otherwise, the soul engineer will find it very difficult to complete everything in one go. He also has to be able to use a Class 8 soul tool perfectly in our deal, and a decomposition cannon expends a lot of soul power. Xian Zuan gradually calmed down as his thoughts stopped there. However, when he felt Hu Yuhao's spiritual undulations and felt his own undulations from his soul core, he still discovered some differences. At least, what made him more gratified was that Hu Yuhao's thing that was similar to a soul core couldn't compare to his own soul core in terms of overall strength. Then that is definitely not a soul core. Yes, doesn't he have that Eye of Destiny? Maybe this is his Eye of Destiny's unique appearance. Xian Zuan continued to console himself. He had never heard of a titled Doluo who could establish a soul core between his eyebrows. Xian Zuan turned and left as well. Staying in the silent room and continuously resisting Hu Yuhao's sporadically appearing spiritual power wasn't comfortable at all. Everyone was still outside when he left the room. Hu Yuhao was still meditating, so they naturally stayed back to protect their junior brother. Teacher Xian, don't you think Yuhao's aura is a little strange? Why do I not remember him having such formidable spiritual power before? Can it be that he has run into another miracle in the time he's spent outside? Shu Sanxia asked curiously. He Kaitu was deep in thought as he nodded and said, yes, I don't remember his spiritual power being that powerful. Furthermore, his soul power seems to have changed. I have no idea where that aura that resembles a savage beast comes from, and the golden light radiating from his body doesn't seem to be coming from his soul power. It goes from in to out, and I don't know what's going on. Feels like he himself has turned golden. Xian Zuan shook his head and said, I'm a soul engineer, not a soul master. You have to bring these questions to the titled Doluo in Shrek Academy. Anyway, I don't care what he's doing, and he's not leaving unless he can forge a Class 8 soul tool. Bei Bei and Shu Sanxia exchanged a helpless look. They still wanted to try to convince Xian Zuan, but it seemed like they should dispel that thought to prevent the bitterness of being rejected. Hu Yuhao meditated for a shorter time than everyone imagined he would. 2 hours later, the soul power undulations from inside the room gradually receded, and a gentle hum that resembled a dragon's roar could be heard. This fellow. If he's done, then he's done. Why is he calling out? Shu Sanxia laughed as he chided, and he was the first back inside the silent room. However, he realized something was wrong once he came back, and that was because Hu Yuhao was still sitting there with his legs crossed and his mouth closed. The dragon hum from his body was still resonating, but that sound seemed to come from his chest. The dragon hum was faint, and it seemed to form a feedback loop with his soul power as it resonated. What's happening? Shu Sanxia turned around and glanced at Bei Bei. Bei Bei had a dragon-type martial soul, and if he didn't know, Bei Bei should know. However, Bei Bei's expression showed the same astonishment. It was evident that he couldn't understand anything that was happening with Hu Yuhao. Hu Yuhao was startled as he gradually opened his eyes. His senior brothers and sisters were all here, and even Ji Juechen, the sword maniac, was here. Ji Juechen almost wasn't in time, but Jing Ziyan immediately ran to call him when she witnessed the strange things happening to Hu Yuhao. Ji Juechen was very interested in and curious about any kind of special circumstances, especially when they were happening to Hu Yuhao. Therefore, he hurried over as quickly as possible. But he couldn't understand anything that was happening to him. You're all here, eldest senior brother. Hu Yuhao sprang to his feet. Hu Yuhao was completely reinvigorated, and he was in his peak condition after more than 2 hours of meditation. At his current cultivation rank, not eating for a few days wasn't a big deal. Furthermore, he possessed immense energy from the manifold mysterious ice essence, and that was enough to sustain his energy expenditure. Even if he didn't meditate, his soul power would be continuously rising, as his spiritual soul core's greatest benefit was that it helped a soul master cultivate in every instant. Xian Zuan took a few steps forward and came before Hu Yuhao. All right, there's not much time left, and nighttime has befallen us. If you haven't forged the decomposition cannon before daybreak, then you will stay here with me. Even though he suspected that Hu Yuhao already had his own soul core, now wasn't the time to ask him. Xian Zuan had to wait for him to stay back before asking him. From his perspective, Hu Yuhao couldn't possibly forge a Class 8 soul tool no matter how prodigious he was. Hu Yuhao nodded and said, "You're very cruel, Teacher Xian. You didn't have to give me such a complicated one even if you want me to forge a Class 8 soul tool. This soul tool breaches knowledge about space, and you would have stumped me if I hadn't gained some understanding of spatial power in recent weeks." "What? You understand something about spatial power?" Xian Zuan's expression was full of disregard. "Do you know what spatial power is? That's something that only titled Doluo or stronger individuals are worthy of studying. You little rascal, hurry up if you're going to it, and stop delaying. I will be watching from the beginning to the end so nobody can help you cheat." Hu Yuhao chuckled and said, "I don't need to cheat. Even though I'm not that confident, I'm still going to try. Let me warm up." He walked behind the working platform as he spoke. Hu Yuhao's expression immediately calmed down as he entered the air around the working platform, and even his aura seemed to become warm and calm. Xian Zuan was very satisfied about that point. Even though his prized student hadn't been conducting any research into soul tools or forging them in recent months, he didn't throw away too much regarding forging soul tools. At the very least, Hu Yuhao's theory and concepts were still sound. Hu Yuhao was just standing there quietly, and he was silent for about 30 seconds as he adjusted his breathing, heart rate, soul power undulations, and even his spiritual power. He allowed every inch of his aura to enter a certain rhythm. Xian Zuan still had a scornful look on his face in the beginning, but his expression quickly gave way to one of surprise, and that was because Hu Yuhao's current state was too similar to that of a very powerful soul engineer. Part 1